looks like the majority of our folks are here. And we're very excited to have all of you with us. This is the fourth in a initial series of 6 webinars that VSG Advantage Trading put together. Russ Simons and I had some discussions a while back, and we're just looking for a way to add value and be of some help to the industry. And so far, the response has been great. We are super excited today to have Dena Crowder join us. I had an opportunity to meet Dena a number of months back on a project that I was working on in LA with Westbrook Inc., which is owned by Will and Jada Smith, and it's just a group of rock star media, television, movie, creative folks that are headed to build the world's largest and best multi-purpose entertainment platform. And VSG had an opportunity to do their culture statement, vision, mission, and values. Dena is their corporate consultant, so it's been great. She's a featured TED Talk presenter, an author, a corporate consultant for lots of other folks as well. And in the process, what I've learned about her is she's deeply skilled in helping all of us remove the obstacles that we have in answering our calling. She's really about some great heart-filled focuses. One of the things she said to me early on is she goes, "Richard, I'm passionate about you being empowered." So she's going to talk to you today about how to do that. She has an incredibly enlightening spin and insight into how all of us can be more focused on us in a way that makes it better to serve others. So Dena, we're going to turn it over to you. We're super excited that you could join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Richard. Hello, everybody. I am so happy to be here to share with you today. And my mission is to bring clarity to a topic that is often confusing, frustrating, sometimes even taboo. So by the end of this webinar, you will be clear on why hiring and retaining people who are different is not a problem to be solved, but an asset to be activated. I want you to walk away knowing the one key element that will make or break any of your change initiatives around this. And best of all, you will have simple, actionable steps that you can take right away so that you can perform better. Before we dive in, let's set ourselves up for success with our one simple house rule. And that is that we're creating value together. No observers here. The more you participate, the more you'll get out of this. So if you could type some Y's in the chat for yes to let us know that we're here. The guys can let me know that you're here and maybe even where some of you are from in the world so that I can get a sense of who's with us. So do we see some Y's in the chat, guys? And by the way, if you hear something during the webinar that's relevant to you or helpful in any way, please just type in a Y for yes or a W for wow, and I also welcome any of your other comments. Okay, yeah? Great, wonderful. I want to speak with you about a business advantage that you might not be using. Business is one of the greatest value creators in the world. It has the potential to improve lives, to move people or nations from poverty to prosperity. And when you're practicing it ethically, it can raise the standard for human life. As we all know, the face and pace of business has changed dramatically, which is why the advantage I'm referencing is no longer an option, but a necessity. You got boomers, you got Gen X, you got millennials, you got Gen Z, all communicate and consume differently. You've got micro identities that focus on race, gender, and religion, just to name a few. And as if that's not enough, you've got your global markets. They each communicate and consume differently. So to survive and thrive in 2020 and beyond, you have to be able to understand what consumers want and be able to give it to them the way they want it. Now, survival of the fittest means that you've got to be able to step out of closed loops. My favorite example of closed loops comes from ancient Egypt. And on the screen, you should see Cleopatra. Cleopatra is famous for a lot of things, but some of you may not know that her husband was also her brother. So the ancient Egyptians, they knew that incest was not great and that it led to deformed and often gravely ill babies. But in the short term, it seemed useful because it delayed the transfer of power. It stalled, but it did not stop the inevitable. That's the situation we face today. The marketplace is changing at lightning speed. We can't stop it, but we can choose to adapt. If we keep doing the same things the same way, we're simply delaying the inevitable. And the result will be the business graveyard. Remember Blockbuster? Yeah. And more recently, WeWork. That's an example. It went from a $47 billion valuation to bankruptcy in just 6 weeks. By the way, something I want you to remember for a little later is that the founder of WeWork, he fit the prototype. Just keep that in mind. So all of this fast-paced changing and plate tectonic shifting was already happening before the virus. And now, as we know, many more businesses are teetering on the precipice. When businesses go bust, lives are ruined. So I'd love in the chat if you have any comments on what I'm talking about, any Y's or W's, we'd love to see it. And so that's why it's even more important in the business environment to understand what can be an advantage. Closed loops, like those in Egypt, they happen when we don't listen to or include other viewpoints. When they happen in business. Closed loops happen when we stay in our comfort zone, hiring and strategizing with people who look like and think like us. It feels good to the ego, and I like it too, because we all like to be comfortable. But it weakens performance, and it negatively impacts profit in the long term. So the reason you want to expand the prototype for who you hire, the reason you want to transform your company culture around inclusion is because that is the way out of the closed loop. Now, I mentioned the prototype, and what I mean by prototype is model for success. I first learned about prototypes when a decision maker, let's call him the man, refused to give me a shot at a job. I was in kindergarten. True story. It was my first ever TV audition, and my mom had prepared me well. I knew what to expect. Dena Crowder, the producer's ready to see you. But as soon as I walked in, he shook his head. Nope, not her. I did not fit the prototype. I didn't get the hint, and so he looked straight at me. We need kids who can read. I can read, I protested. Visibly annoyed, he continued. Look, kid, I am sorry. I mean, really read. I had been dissed and dismissed, but my 5-year-old self wasn't having it. I heard my great-grandmother's voice telling me to stand up and speak up. I heard my grandmother's voice too, reminding me that respect is a two-way street. How could I show this producer that I could read and that he was wrong about me? Well, I spied a newspaper on a corner table and it gave me an idea. I made a beeline to that paper and I began reading. Final edition. President to city, drop dead. Vows he'll veto any bailout. Their jaws dropped, and I kept going because I'm dramatic. But the producer, he spun on his heels. He was shocked. And you know what happened next? I got the job. It would be a long time before I understood the bigger implications of my fight to be seen and heard by people who assumed I had nothing to offer because I didn't fit the prototype. In that story, the producer changed his mind. It was an act of humility and an act of power. But that doesn't always happen. There have been many cases where the gatekeepers refused to budge, and my great-grandmother's wisdom to stand up and speak up seemed to get me nowhere. It was in those moments that my grandmother Dolly's wise counsel about respect came to the rescue. It eventually helped me crack the code around why the topic of diverse hiring elicits so much confusion and dissatisfaction. Can we please get honest? Please. And I'd love to see that in the chat too. We have had decades of workshops, seminars, and change initiatives. Yet you know what? The data is clear. Everybody, and when I say everybody, Black, brown, white, Asian, man, woman, is still frustrated. In 2019, I conducted a series of extensive interviews with professionals representing a wide range of race, gender, age, and cultural viewpoints. The first question I asked was, would you rather attend a diversity training or do your taxes? I'd like you to guess in the chat what the overwhelming answer was. If you guessed taxes, you are correct. 95% prefer doing their taxes. I asked every persuasion and nobody's happy. Publicly, we are towing the PC line, but privately, diversity training is less popular than a trip to the dentist or a day at traffic school. One of the interviewees remarked to me, it's overwhelming. No matter what we try, it just doesn't work. And I say, of course not, because the only way that your efforts can succeed, and by succeed, I mean create dynamic, collaborative workplaces that are not only profitable, but adaptive, innovative, out of those closed loops, we have to flip the script on the status quo approach. I want to explain how to do that, but first, let's separate the two types of diversity. There's inherent diversity, which is about race and gender. I got that one. And there's acquired diversity. That's about experience and culture. I have that one too. When you have both, it's called two-dimensional diversity. And when I asked people I interviewed what they thought diversity meant for their company, they said everything from mandatory employee training to hiring Black and brown candidates to promoting women, saving a certain number of spots for people in wheelchairs. Some even said, well, doesn't it mean a culture of unity and belonging? No wonder we are confused. We have zero agreement, which means we certainly don't agree on how to get there or what there even looks like. And as a collective, we're not clear on why it matters. I'd like you to take a moment to consider what the current situation is facing your workplace or organization where diversity is concerned. If you have something to write on, piece of paper or your mobile device, maybe begin taking some notes and exploring, what does it mean to you? Has it become a compliance-based checklist? A thing you do just to not get sued? Or does it seem like an actual value add? Is it a consultant you pay to come in and give a 3-hour workshop on unconscious bias? Or has it been prioritized throughout your organization from the top down? So I want you to keep your personal answers in mind as we continue and to keep exploring some of these questions. In a landmark study by Harvard Business Review and Strativity, 91% of respondents reported having experienced a change initiative wah, 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 failure in their organization. Corporate Leadership Council found that only 43% of human resources executives think that current approaches to gender diversity are effective at all. And articles in highly esteemed publications like the Harvard Business Review have titles like "Diversity Training Doesn't Work." Yet, simultaneously, there's backlash from white men who believe that women or minorities are taking away key opportunities from them, getting a free ride, while those same women and minorities claim that their progress has been fraught and tenuous. So let me ask you, are we doomed? What do you think? I say no. Not if we flip the script, and not if we listen to grandma. Even as a little girl, my grandmother loved to feed people. And this is back in the 1920s, this picture. And at that time, she met Molly and her sister Kylie in the neighborhood. Now, Molly happened to be white, and Dolly didn't see why this should be a problem, because to her, people were people. She said, I figured that since the good Lord saw fit to put them in my neighborhood, we were meant to be friends. And her first friend gift was 2 thick slices of ham. They had never had ham before, she told me, but after they tried it, they came over nearly every time we served it. Some of you, I know, may not believe this, but the cure to much of what ails us in the diversity department can be distilled down to a single word: respect. Respect has its roots in the Sanskrit, spek, and it means to see. When you see someone, you see what's alike and what's different. And rather than hiding or ignoring those differences, you acknowledge them. With acknowledgement comes value. You can listen, offer fair treatment, and work with rather than against people. By forging an unusual friendship for her date and time, my grandmother engaged in a quiet act of power. I know it sounds simple, but if all we did was actually bring some respect to our quandaries around diversity, we would shift the context from a problem to be solved to an asset to be activated. In the world of business, we're motivated to find an edge that can help increase profit. Let's call this an advantage. Unfortunately, what's often neglected is the incredible advantage that comes from hiring and including people who are different from whatever your norm is. The year that Steve Jobs started iTunes, I was coaching some high-level creatives who worked with his team. And where music executives saw a problem, he saw opportunity. When he originally began pitching the idea, he got no respect from key players. They didn't see what he did. The iTunes Music Store opened April 28, 2003, and it replaced Best Buy and Walmart to become the #1 music retailer. The rest is history. Because he was an outsider, Jobs saw more clearly what consumers wanted and where the market wanted to go. It's because he was different, not in spite of it, that he sparked revolutions in multiple niches. Steve Jobs did not fit the prototype for an American tycoon. He was an orphan, born out of wedlock. His father was Lebanese. He was adopted by parents who were not college educated, and himself, he was a college dropout. In his youth, he was a hippie with famously bad hygiene, interested in esoteric reading, calligraphy, and of course, computers, and who ate his best meal of the week at the local Hare Krishna temple. These experiences of acquired and inherent diversity gave him a spectacular advantage. I want you to consider what bringing in that two-dimensional kind of diversity might mean for your company. Again, this is something to explore. It's a much longer exploration, but you can begin now, just jotting down some things. And there's no need to be high concept either. One of the most profitable pivots I've ever made in my career came from a heated argument with a male left brain licensed engineer turned successful trial attorney who's a boomer. I was in a closed loop listening to my mostly right brain creative friends and clients my own age, but in the end, the boomer, I hate to admit it, was right. The boomer was my dad. Here's what we know for sure. It doesn't work to outsource the so-called diversity problem, making it one lone person's responsibility. It's not enough to hire someone whose job it is to check off quotas and hire employees who fit mandated categories. If they're hired, but they aren't included or empowered to contribute, no advantage. If the leadership team doesn't exhibit two-dimensional diversity or doesn't communicate with people who do, no advantage. And if you ignore what's distinct or different about team members in an attempt to fabricate this kind of kumbaya type of harmony, no heat, saying things like, well, I don't see color, again, no advantage. You may have your next great mind in the building, but if they're marginalized or sidelined, you're missing out. It's only when diverse perspectives are actually being respected and invited into the mix of creation and decision-making, that companies out-innovate and outperform others. Only then are employees 45% likelier to report that their firm's market share grew over the previous year, 70% likelier to report that the firm captured a new market. Two-dimensional diversity unlocks innovation by creating an environment where outside-the-box ideas are heard. So, if the rewards are so great, why aren't we doing it? Because it's hard. It's hard to confront widely accepted myths. It's hard to feel a loss of power or control as you expand your idea about who should have a say in leadership or who gets a seat at the table. And most of the approaches towards diversity forget all about the human factor. And that's why so many fail. So what goes wrong? Well, we forget that we're dealing with people. Every human being has ingrained beliefs, and these beliefs, many of them unconscious, shape our actions. The famed Swiss psychologist Carl Jung made it plain. If you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. That's why, even though we have plenty of examples of women and people of color in prominent positions in 2020, our prototype for success is still a 1960s man, as epitomized by Don Draper on the Mad Men series. Any fans? I love that series. In a survey conducted by gender and organization expert Michelle King, who's currently the director of inclusion for Netflix, she discovered that over 70% of people responding still saw Don Draper as the ideal prototype, archetype for work. And what this means is that overwhelmingly all genders and races have unconsciously internalized a picture that's out of step with the demands of business today. So it's valuable for you to take a moment to just write down the question of, what is my prototype? And it's something that you can begin to explore now and, of course, go into much more detail later. Because remember, we all have unconscious pictures. It's normal. And the pervasive picture in our collective unconscious is if you don't fit the prototype, you're not as worthy or competent. And if you don't fit the prototype, the value of your contribution, well, we pay it lip service when in reality, the mere fact that you've been hired is seen as a favor. Now, I became personally exposed to the favor paradigm as a 7th grader at an elite all-girls school, when my ancient history teacher said, all of you girls are lucky, but none so lucky as Dena Crowder. Just a few years ago, we didn't let in Black students, and now, well, we let you in. She said we let you in, but what she didn't say, but what I felt was, and aren't you the lucky one? Now, I'm not sharing this story to bash her. I'm sharing this story because it demonstrates what happens when we operate from the assumption that the person who's different is the one receiving all the benefit. When inclusion is a one-way favor, it creates a dynamic that stymies progress and breeds disconnection. The teacher could not see that I had something valuable to contribute, not just to her, but to the entire school community. Now, what if she'd said, we're happy to have you here, Dena? That would have flipped the script, because small, meaningful acts of respect, they flip the script. So even though we may believe in the power of inclusion, many of us have still unconsciously internalized outdated notions. And that's why these hit it and quit it seminars, or kind of the one and done workshops telling people don't stereotype so we get sued, that's why those things don't work. So what produces results? Well, prioritizing inclusion from the top down, getting honest about your unconscious prototypes, creating an environment where you share authority and credit, ensuring that everyone is heard, teaching people to connect and communicate with others, and providing ongoing mentorship and training, which is more about connection, communication, and working with others rather than any sort of, hey, that person's different from me and we brought them in and they're a different category. It's really about people. So far, we have learned activating the performance advantage of diverse teams requires more than begrudgingly filling out those compliance checklist quotas or the favor paradigm or making diversity somebody else's problem. It requires hiring, retaining, and including two-dimensional diversity at all levels of the company, including leadership. Respect is the essential factor. When you respect someone, you see them, you value their unique perspectives. And we've also learned that avoiding change because it's hard keeps us in a closed loop. And then we don't get that advantage of those two-dimensional diverse teams that outperform others. So I'd like to ask, what's staying with you so far? What are you learning? What's new? What's hitting you? The term survival of the fittest is often used to justify maintaining a status quo. And however, it's been grossly misunderstood. I want to share something with you. Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one that's most responsive to change. Imagine a world where cooperation born of respect is the norm. Imagine a dynamic where businesses profit financially and also serve humanity. That world begins with you and me. It begins when we shift from the doing them a favor mindset to recognizing the value of inclusion. So when gaffes like this happen, this was a Gucci campaign, I also wonder, I wonder whether it was a deliberate PR strategy. Because if it wasn't, and this is Burberry, they had a similar problem, it signals that there was no one who looked like or thought like me, no person of color, no two-dimensional diversity in the room where it happened. And this is so important because of that changing marketplace. The Viacom Velocity Project, it said while millennials want a seat at the table, Gen Z wants to flip that table. What brands have to learn now, they said, is that the power has to be shared with the consumer, and that for the younger generation, it's non-negotiable. That's where culture is going. So let's look at what we've learned and what the points are that can help you now. I have spent years analyzing what it takes for people and organizations to embrace diversity and thrive. And what I've found is that it distills down to these topics and these steps. Awareness. I'm aware that exclusion and closed loops are harmful and prevent progress. Courage. I stand up and speak up for inclusion, even though it may be uncomfortable. Respect. I see others' differences and I value their contributions. And tussle. I'm willing to tussle with new ideas and approaches because that's the key to better performance and a dynamic work culture. So one of the things that you can do right now before we complete this webinar is to do a simple self-assessment and ask, are decisions being made by people who look and think alike or look and think like me? Have we stayed in a cozy comfort zone and thus a closed loop by claiming we have diversity of thought without really opening to two-dimensional diversity? What are the concerns, the hesitations, the barriers? Remember, you have to get honest, that I and my company might have about more inclusion. And what's the first step? Small act of power that you could take starting today. Just one small shift to begin. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with people. Regardless of past history, all human beings, whether privileged or hailing from poverty, want to contribute because we want to matter. It is an essential human need. My 5-year-old self wanted to contribute. I didn't check the right boxes yet. I was the right one for the role. We don't have a diversity and inclusion crisis so much as we have a crisis of connection and respect. And while ethnicity, class, and gender and color are key elements in the story, they are not the story. The story is about power. To flip the script on the crisis, we have to expand our outdated picture of power. And if we succeed, and I believe we can, our companies and our country will be the example for and envy of the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dena. That's amazing and fantastic. I'll take the screen back here so we can make sure people know how much we appreciate what you did. Was touched by, as I'm sure many, we're going to get to Q&A here in just a second. Think about opportunity, and that's how I've often seen it, but you give us insights today about this is actually a business advantage. And the story of Molly and Dolly, everybody will have their own opportunity, I'm sure, in the Q&A to share some things, but listen to grandma, and isn't that right? You know, what a wise grandma you had. I think that my biggest takeaway is the spect to see out of respect, and that's what we really need to do. So I want to thank you on behalf of Russ and myself and the VSG Advantage training team and all of our participants. We had a very large group. Thank you so much for your time and volunteering to make us smarter, and hopefully people will feel this in their heart more than their brain, and we'll see some change and some small, meaningful moves towards respect. So thank you so much, Dena.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I'm, thrilled to have been asked to participate.
Great. Well, we're going to get to Q&A because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions here. I do want to remind everyone that next Wednesday, 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific time, same channel. Mike Song will be back for his second of 2 sessions, and his first one was rock star category. We had lots of comments, as I'm sure we will, from today's with Dena. So don't miss that. More tips than you can count. And then our final in this first set is set as none of us as smart as all of us, and we have 4 industry icons that will be joining us to share their insights and stories about why none of us is as smart as all of us. So as I said, 4 industry icons. We're grateful to have Adina Irwin, Lee Zeidenman, Anthony Bonavita, and Russ Simons each will be sharing the webinar stage to share some stories with you. And we're really looking forward to that. So with that, let's move to our Q&A. And if you will, you'll type those in, we will be happy to answer. One that's popped up right away, Dena, is could you go a little further explaining the concept of tussle?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So one of the things that happens, and it's kind of popular now, and I mentioned it a little bit in the talk, is we want to have a peaceful, harmonious workplace. And so we avoid conflict. And there are 2 types of conflict. There's destructive conflict and there's healthy conflict. We need healthy conflict, which I will call heat, in order to create that business advantage. So remember that story with my dad, the boomer. It came out of an argument. And I'm going to tell you the thing he told me to do, I pivoted, I switched directions, and it was amazingly profitable. But I didn't agree with him at first. Why? Because he had a different viewpoint, and I resisted. So that's what I mean by tussle. It's not destructive conflict, but it's the kind of heat that brings the advantage.
Terrific. One thing you mentioned in that, and before we jump to any other questions, I want to just throw this out, as I'm sure you are. I'm a fan of Patrick Lucione and the 5 behaviors of a team. They've sort of flipped that. It used to be the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and now it's the 5 behaviors. And as you talked about healthy conflict, it certainly struck a nerve, I'm sure, with Russ and myself, because it's one of the core pieces of one of our programs, Synergy, around team building, is that if you don't have trust, and by that I think what we mean is vulnerability trust. It's one thing to know, yeah, okay, I'll be there at 5 o'clock and I trust that person's telling me the truth. But that I know you have my best interests, that vulnerability trust, that you're not here to throw me under the bus or to go talk about me at the water cooler, then I'm willing to be open to you and really tell you how I feel, so we can have that healthy debate and healthy conflict and not carry barge down the road with it. Can you expand a little bit on that as to how that ties to tussle versus the healthy conflict that you talk about?
Absolutely. Trust is the bottom line for being able to have tussle, being able to have heat. And you said it so well. If I believe that somebody does not have my best interest at heart, does not have goodwill for me, then tussle is not possible, because you are going to be walking around waiting for the other shoe to drop and just really on edge, because this person or the people at your company don't have your best interests. One of the things that I tell people that often, that they're quizzical about is, I say, I have clients who are 2 and 3 times a week church going, meat eating, more on the boomer age category kind of people. And then I have Michelle Obama loving vegan kind of clients. And we have a fantastic relationship, and we tussle well because they know they can trust me. I have goodwill for them. I have good intentions for them, and I respect them as people.
We may come back to that. We've got other questions coming in, but I may have a follow-up at the end if we have time. But next question is put yourself in this position. If you've just taken a new job to lead a company or a venue, what's the first thing you would assess in your current team regarding diversity?
Oh, that's a great question. So the first thing that you would assess is just look around, assess these different kind of layers, some of which we talked about. We talked about the inherent and we talked about the acquired. So I would assess the team along both of those lines. What kind of inherent diversity, we're talking race, gender, etc., and then acquired. What kind of experiences, what kind of backgrounds, what kind of culture, and just see what you've got in your mix. The idea isn't to have some kind of numerical algorithmic perfection. We've got one of this and two of that, right? It's really to see, you use the word synergy, whether or not you have some synergy where there's a little bit of a mix up in your team. And it also is very important to look at what the market is or the business you're in, because some businesses are going to require that you have, let's say, I mentioned Gen Z, that you have some Gen Z people and that you have a certain number of women and a certain number of people of color, or depending on the size of your team, etc. Whereas other businesses, maybe you don't need as much contribution from one or the other. But I would say in today's environment, you really want to strive to have some of everybody's voice represented.
Terrific. You mentioned Gen Z in that, and it ties into a question from, and by the way, the reason the questions are good is we have amazing participants. The venue, hospitality, and entertainment industry, we're smart. So we have a connection.
You've got
yeah,
it.
Yeah, we have a connection to your Gen Z comment. One of our participants asked, how do we give Gen Z the power to flip the table, Dena?
Oh, well, they already believe they have the power to flip the table, because for them, the internet is a tool of power and they really know how to use it. So they already have a belief and a feeling that they deserve to flip the table. So all we have to do is make an effort to connect and communicate, find channels through which we can connect, communicate, and bring them in to the conversation, because they're ready to go. They really are.
One of our participants has a more specific question, which I'm sure you'll have some good insight to. My civil service workplace, which is certainly a way to, a lot of us come from both public and private sector in this, so it's a helpful insight. My civil service workplace has lots of diversity, but it's very siloed and lacks diversity in work areas such as accounting and engineering and booking being getting events into their venue. As a leader, would you suggest I create projects that bring these folks together to problem solve, or is there another insight you have?
I think that's a great idea, because remember, diversity at its very, very core, it is about seeing the value. Well, when I say diversity, the problem that we have, right? It gets solved when we step back and say, oh, other viewpoints, other people, other kinds of people, other experiences are valuable. There is a contribution that can give all of us on this team or in this company an advantage. So the idea that the participant had about bringing people from teams or groups that don't normally connect and communicate, and let me underscore that with a marker, connect and communicate is key, because if you can bring them into projects and exchanges where they get to connect and communicate and share ideas, work on things together, contribute, guess what? Well, they'll start to see that these other people that maybe they didn't talk to before have something to offer.
Great, thanks, Dena. Another question came in. What's the most critical change that we must make to face the future effectively?
Oh my goodness. Does that have to do with specifically bringing diverse people together, or is that question?
Let's throw it out as to where does your heart lead you? Because while a good bit of the learning that we've had an opportunity to take in today has come around this whole concept of a collective group of people makes us all better for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
You may, whatever's on your heart. So what's the most critical change that we must make to face the future effectively, whether it's specifically about diversity or not? I think we'd love to hear your thought.
Well, the way that I teach power, I say power begins with connection. And when I teach power, I'm not talking about all of the distorted ways that sometimes we experience power as force or violence or power over. I'm speaking about really authentic power. And I believe that for the future, if we want to go into this vision of the world that I painted, where we are really an example for an envy of the world, and we can lead the way for a better world, we have to begin with connection. When we connect to ourselves and connect to other people and realize that we have more to contribute to each other and together than if we silo off, as I think one of your participants said, then we really solve our problems. We respect, we see one another. And that's, to me, that's what's on my heart. When I look out at all of the messes that we have, I see that at the bottom, there's a crisis of connection. We're looking at the other, and that is where diversity kind of does come into play. We look at somebody that's different, and this doesn't have to do with workplace diversity, it's just in our world. We look at somebody who's different, and we assume that they don't have anything in common with us, or that they're against us. And I just don't think that's the case.
So really, it's really around great relationship making, communication, building it.
Absolutely.
You can't force power on people. You earn it is what I think we hear you saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have another question, Lynn Palmer, regarding the tussle side and speaking up out. I think the second bullet, do you have any language to assist with calling in out when we see or hear those non-inclusive comments? Like the example you gave of, you're the luckiest. How do you recommend all of us deal with that? And because a lot of times, as you pointed out about Mad Men, you know, it just gets stuck into our brain, and most of us don't even realize we're doing something that's sexist or racist or non-inclusive.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There was a story, I didn't tell it today, but in high
Not
school.
too late.
What'd you say, Richard?
I said it's not too late.
There was a story that I didn't tell today, and it was in high school. I was in a history class, different teacher altogether. Dr. Pearson, one of my, oh God, all-time favorite teachers. And one of the young ladies raised her hand to say, well, if the slave trade ended on this date, how come the number of slaves keeps increasing and increasing? And she kind of paused, and then she worked it out. She said, oh, I got it. It's because they were making baby slaves.
Wow.
And he just paused. He was kind, but he was firm. And he said, no. He said, they're human beings. They're people. And they were having children just like your parents had you. Slavery was a state of bondage, but they're human beings. And I've never forgotten that, because that small act of power was so meaningful to me sitting in that classroom. And he course corrected her but he wasn't rude. He was respectful to her. He didn't assume the worst about her. You know, we have a lot of cancel culture now. He didn't do that. He took the time to have a teachable moment. And that is back to relationships, back to connecting, and back to goodwill. If you can take a pause and say, okay, what is a respectful way that I might be able to communicate to this person that this isn't the appropriate language, or this isn't the best way to go.
Great, thank you for that. Another question, this one really around power, self-servant power or significance. And you know, you and I share a bond and a love for Ken Blanchard. Let me read you this question. When you stated power is earned, how would one distinguish real power from a self-serving power?
Oh, okay, great. Well, I would say that the self-serving power, I call it power over. And we see a lot of examples about that. The power over is juxtaposed, or let's say contrary to, let's correct that, contrary to power with and power to. So when we're talking about authentic power, personally, when you feel authentically powerful, you feel at choice, at cause, you feel connected, and you feel able to direct your energy and resources. That's how I define personal power. And when you feel that way, you're in your authentic power, and you can practice power with and power to, which is what we were describing in the vision of what's possible. However, if you're practicing power over, then it becomes more about domination, and it's run by the fear of loss.
Terrific, great answer. Well, on behalf of everyone, we typically try to make sure we get everybody out inside of an hour, because in this day and age now, what we've all learned is we're a lot busier working from home than we ever were, because everything's got to get scheduled. Everything's a Zoom meeting. So thank you to all of you who joined today. Dena, again, thank you from Russ and I and the VSG Advantage Training family for taking the time out to share such great insights and wisdoms. I'm sure we'll have lots of follow-up from our participants as well, and I'll check back in with you. And this link will be up on our YouTube channel within 24 hours. We have a large Pacific Rim contingent that's been following and watching, so they'll be jumping on that as well. And again, thank you, everybody. Don't forget, next week Mike Song is back, and until then, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.